So while I was gallivanting around playing other games, Season of the Wish launched, bringing with it this gun, the Ros Arago IV. Evidently, people were quite excited about this weapon, but I'd venture to say it wasn't the gun as a whole that caused a stir, rather the reintroduction of the Onslaught perk. Is Ros Arago with Onslaught really that good though, or were these YouTube thumbnails and titles mildly overstating things? And I'm not saying I have a problem with that, bold claims and grand promises do win clicks on YouTube, but I can't help but think that when a gun gets this much attention this fast, a lot of it's just kinda knee-jerk reaction, whereas I'd rather base my decision off numbers and testing. Which is why we're here. I'll put Ros Arago through its paces, try to collect all the relevant data points, and then you can decide for yourself whether you think this gun deserves a spot in your loadout. Ros Arago IV is a legendary void adaptive frame auto rifle firing at 600 rounds per minute with a base 41 rounds in the magazine. Mine does have 46 thanks to the appended mag. The recoil direction there sitting at 47 does set us up for a somewhat erratic left-hand pull, but we're going to take a closer look at that in just a few minutes. For the stats, they are pretty well in line with most other adaptive auto rifles, with no real outliers to speak of. On my roll, I was very happy to get small bore, by far my favorite barrel option for automatic weapons, giving a +7 to range and +7 to stability. In column 3, I did snag the old reliable subsistence, loading rounds back into the magazine when defeating a target. And in column 4, Onslaught. Final blows with this weapon increase its fire rate, and while not mentioned, it will provide a boost to the reload speed as well. Not to be overlooked, the wildcard origin trait. Final blows have a chance to create an experimental submunition at the target's location, which do share the same basic properties as a lingering Telesto projectile. I did end up with a handling masterwork on this one, which I'm not exactly thrilled about, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. Heading over to light.gg to check out the rest of the weapons perk pool, we do have 9 of the standardized barrel options available, and 7 magazine options, with accurized rounds probably being the one that most players are looking for, especially due to the absence of options like ricochet, high caliber, or armor piercing rounds. Perk column 3 does have some good selections available. I think subsistence or rewind rounds probably do pair best with Onslaught, but if you are running a void subclass, repulsor brace isn't a bad option. And dynamic sway reduction's never a bad pick if you are looking to tune this weapon more for the crucible. Then permeability. I'm not a huge fan. I know a lot of people do like it just because solar is so strong in the artifact this season and it does let the weapon tap into those perks, or stranded stasis users can run a full weapon suite of that elemental damage type. I'd rather spend that slot on a perk that leans into or directly increases a weapon's value rather than shifting its value. Plus, if you really do want a solar Onslaught auto rifle, the retuned Summoner is going to be available in trials this weekend, that being March 15th, 2024, and it does look really good. In column 4, there are some decent options, but I'm assuming that if you want this auto rifle, you want it because of Onslaught. As of right now, I mean, that is the perk that really sets it apart. Onto a little bit of functionality testing now, starting out with the Onslaught perk. And while a lot of this information is already available, when reviewing a weapon, I feel like I haven't done my due diligence if I don't at least make the effort to confirm. Onslaught activates on kill and has a 4.5 second total duration that will be refreshed on subsequent kills. It stacks up to 3 times, with each stack increasing the perk's benefits. For the fire rate boost, at base I was able to empty out the 46 round magazine in 4.53 seconds. With a single stack of Onslaught, that time was cut down to 3.77 seconds. At 2 stacks, we shaved another 0.6 of a second, dropping down to 3.19 seconds. At 3x, max stacks, we break that 3 second mark and hit a 2.79 second time to empty. So that is pretty darn close to that 20-40-60 jump that the perk should be providing. I will be using my actual times in the damage testing coming up, but conversationally, 720, 840, and 960 would be the fire rate improvements. And like I said in the stats section, we're also getting a hidden boost to the reload speeds. I have the base reload clocked in at 1.74 seconds, 1.57 at 1x, 1.45 at 2, and a very quick 1.34 second reload speed at the max stacks. Then subsistence. If you weren't aware, auto rifles and SMGs get a marginally better benefit from the perk than other weapon classes. This yesteryear pulse rifle, for example, it has a 48 round magazine, kills reload 6 rounds, about a 12.5% magazine refund. With Ros Arago on its 46 round magazine, each kill is stuffing 9 rounds back in, which is about a 19.5% magazine reload. So subsistence is a great perk in general, but even more so with auto rifles. One last thing to touch on here, the weapon's recoil. 47. Not too good, right? And while I'm sure some of you are aware of what I'm about to say, some might not be. Auto rifles have front-loaded recoil. That means they're at their most erratic when you first pull the trigger, and then they begin to stabilize. You can see when I start firing, making no attempt to control the weapon, those first 7 rounds yank pretty violently to the left. But then, things start to level out. There is still some vertical climb and some left-hand pull, but it is very manageable. So while the stat doesn't look great, you're not really fighting the full effect of it when you're laying on the trigger. Just thought that was something worth mentioning for anyone not in the know. With that, we're heading to the Spire of the Watcher dungeon to check in on some damage numbers. Starting versus Akalos, we're seeing crits land for 1,148. So with our 46 round magazine, if we do land all crits, that's a maximum of 52,808 points of damage. Working off of our established base time to empty of 4.53 seconds, that puts our damage per second at 11,657. With Onslaught now, the buff is a fire rate increase, so our total single mag damage is going to remain static, but we will be able to deliver it much faster, boosting up just the DPS. And here again, using our already established numbers, you can see at just 1 stack, the damage per second does jump up by about 2,500. And at 3 stacks, it improves by over 7,000. And for a legendary primary, I mean, that's very acceptable. But to really put things in perspective, we do need a point of comparison. So when selecting one, my thought process was, for me personally, what weapon would this be directly replacing? And while this one's often seen as a PvP weapon, when I'm on a Void subclass, I love using my Killing Wind Adrenaline Junkie Sheora's Wrath in PvE. At base, it crits Akalos for 1,556 points of damage and can deal a total of 42,012 in its considerably smaller 27 round magazine. I have the time to empty clocked at 2.55 seconds, putting the base damage per second at 16,475, which does rival that of Onslaught times 2. If we credit my Sheoras with the 33% Adrenaline Junkie buff, that would take the single mag damage almost up to 56,000 and put the damage per second just under 22,000. Besting Ros Arago with Onslaught in both cases. But it's not exactly case closed because this is only part of the story. First, bosses are not exactly either weapon's ideal target. A legendary primary, unless things have gone to hell in a handbasket, is not what you're going to be using to melt down a boss. Second, you always got to be careful when doing a cross-weapon class comparison because damage scaling can be vastly different between weapon types, and this is one of those cases. Let's take a look at damage versus majors. To start, we do have different crit multipliers, which is not really vital to the conversation, but it's information that I thought you might like to have. But Ros Arago sees its overall damage improved by 41%, where Sheora's only goes up by 23%. So the total single mag damage margin does grow in favor of Ros Arago, but Sheora's base damage per second does still best it by about 4,000 points. If we move down one more tier, now looking at minor damage, the auto rifle is going to get another 10%, while the SMG remains unchanged. Now the gap in the base damage per second is just over 2,000 points, still in favor of Sheora's, but with just a single stack of Onslaught, Ros Arago does overtake it. And with each weapon's respective damage perk firing on all cylinders, 3 stacks of Onslaughts giving us a damage per second of 29,414, compared to Sheora's 5x Adrenaline Junkie giving us 27,207. So, I mean, yeah, for an auto rifle, that is pretty darn good. For its performance, I'm not going to linger too long here. I really don't think there's any great mystery to unravel. It will mow through red bars at pretty much any content level. It has enough punch to reach up and help out with some major targets when Onslaught is rolling. Being a Void weapon, you can find some Void subclass synergy, with my favorite being volatile rounds that do feel very good on this weapon. And Overload Auto is in the artifact this season, so you can put that to good use. But here's the reason I don't think it holds a ton of intrinsic value. If you've been playing Destiny for any length of time, how many weapons do you have that are capable of plowing through hordes of red bars? Probably a good amount. Weapons that fill that role aren't terribly hard to come by, and Ros Arago isn't exactly leaps and bounds ahead of the pack. That being said though, there's nothing wrong with that. Destiny as a franchise has been out for nearly 10 years at this point. Keeping weapons feeling fresh and interesting while maintaining some sort of balance is a never-ending battle, and it's one that just gets more difficult with every passing season. So when Bungie introduces something, or reintroduces in this case, a perk or weapon that captures the player base's attention, I think that's a win any way you slice it. So while I do perceive Ros Arago with Onslaught as more of a side grade when considering some of our other good ad clearing options, it does offer something a little bit different, and at this point, maybe that's all we really need. But onto PvP now, and the Crucible resilience changes are now live in private matches. So I was able to go through the painstaking task of picking through the total hit points at each resilience tier to get more dialed in numbers in terms of damage per shot. On screen, crits are registering for 27 and body shots are showing for 16. I'm figuring that's more like 26.7 for crits, and just a shade over 15 for the body shot damage. Not even 15.1, but if that number does cross the threshold, it does get rounded up. The optimal time to kill here is going to be unchanged from the previous sandbox. 0.8 seconds with 8 crits and 1 body shot, except versus tier 10 Resilience Guardians. They will require 9 crits. Regarding the body shot time to kill, we did lose a little bit. It was 1.3 seconds with 14 shots in our previous sandbox. Now tier 7 or less will need 15 shots, tier 8 or higher, 16. So that brings the body shot time to kills up to 1.4 or 1.5. For the optimal range, I was hitting for full damage right around the 29.5 meter mark, with a 49 in the stat category. Past that, damage fall off began. With the Onslaught perk and its fire rate increases, at 1 stack you're firing at roughly 720 RPM, which puts you at about a 0.67 second optimal time to kill. 2 stacks, 840 rounds per minute, 0.57 optimal time to kill. And at 3 stacks, 960 rounds per minute, you can down targets in as little as half a second. In terms of Ros Arago's PvP performance, I don't have a ton to say. I've not been much of a PvP guy as of late, but I did pop in for a few Guardian Game Supremacy matches, and things went okay. Ros Arago felt like a serviceable enough auto rifle. Being an adaptive, it is pretty user-friendly, and you never really have to fight the weapon to land shots. And I like that nice big reticle frame, it does give you a good picture when aiming down sights. And the Onslaught perk is a nice buff. With just 1 stack, you are seeing a pretty solid improvement to your kill speeds. Unfortunately, I'm just not a player who's going to go on a murder spree with any sort of regularity, so the high-end 3-stack benefits are not ones that I'm often going to be able to realize. And due to the overall downgrade of the body shot damage profile, you definitely gotta keep on heads. This probably wouldn't have given me from 3 years ago much trouble, but me from right now can definitely feel the overall drop in forgiveness. But yeah, as a whole, I'd say Ros Arago is a pretty decent gun. I'm not gonna set off fireworks or sacrifice goats in its honor. It can hold its own though, and Onslaught is a perk that's pretty enjoyable to use, at least in my opinion. But that's all I got for you today, Guardians. Please leave the video a like on your way out if you did enjoy it, and I'll catch you on the next one.